Hi, my name is Dale Maley. I'd like to tell you in this video about a recent project I just finished with bookbinding. Little background on this project. I actually made my first handbound book back in December of 2016. It was quite a learning experience, and I am a woodworker mostly. I haven't done too many bookbinding projects. So like woodworking, I found out there's many different ways to arrive at the same end result when you're doing bookmaking or bookbinding. So as I went through and made this second book, or some might say serial number 2, I decided to document the process as I went along. So for this second book, I decided to also make it 232 pages, which turns out to be about 5/8 of an inch thick. I plan on using acid-free 8.5 by 11 paper. I actually got a package of it, but I forgot to use it on this project. That's okay. And on this, you fold the paper in half, which gives your pages a 5.5 inch width, and they're 8.5 inches tall. So to make the manuscript, I actually use LibreOffice to make the manuscript, not Microsoft Word. And you can see what settings I use in LibreOffice to make the manuscript. And the settings will probably be similar if you use Microsoft Word. Once you got the manuscript done, then you need to make a PDF file. So LibreOffice has a nice option to be able to export a PDF file of the manuscript. Once you have a PDF file of the manuscript, then you need to convert it over into what's called signatures in the bookmaking world. So I actually use a free program called Bookbinder 3. It's actually a simple JavaScript file, and you can probably find that free program if you do a search on the internet. You basically input your manuscript PDF file into the program, and then it outputs the signature files that you need for your book, and they're in PDF format. Here's a copy of the inputs that I used in the Bookbinder 3.0 program to generate the signatures. Not going to go through all the settings, but you can see them here for the size of book that I am making. One important thing is that this program outputs the signature files to the same directory the program is in. That confused me for a little while until I figured that out. So the program generated 8 different signature files, as you can see here. They number them 0 through 7, but it adds up to 8 different PDF files. And you basically go print each one of those PDF files, and you need to print on both sides of the page. Now when you print the signature PDF files, you'll have to get your printer set up in the right format to print out what you need, which includes printing on both sides of the paper. So here's the settings that are appropriate for my printer. You may have to play around with a different printer to get the right settings. So play around on that first signature and get them right before you go print out all 8 signatures. Once you get the signature pages printed out, then you can start folding them in half and prepare each signature. Here I am, the first 3 pieces of paper for the first signature. Now the bookbinding hobby has its own set of terms and it can be confusing, so let's just look at a little signature math. So in my case, the first signature file was called signature 0. It uses 8 sheets of 8.5 by 11 paper. But you get 4 book pages for each sheet of paper, which means you get a total of 32 book pages. 8 times 4 is 32. And it's going to take you 58 pages of 8.5 by 11 paper. And it's very time consuming waiting for the printer to print those 232 pages when it prints on both sides. Once you have the signatures all printed and folded, the next step is going to be punching the holes to sew them. So I put a signature on a piece of cardboard, so when you poke through with the awl, you don't want to hit a good table or anything underneath. I make up a template card then that's got marks where I want to punch the holes with the awl. I go a little overboard on this size of book in that I punch in 6 holes, and the design that I have for those 6 holes where they go is shown here. So here's a photo of my 8 folded signatures all ready to punch. Before I started punching the holes with the awl, I did take all the signatures, put them together, and then clamp them very tightly in my vise for about 10 minutes, just to help flatten them out as much as possible before I started punching them with the awl. Here's a photo of the step where I'm sewing up all the signatures. I plan on having 2 pieces of ribbon in here, so I sew them in as well. But after I got the signature almost done, all of them sewed up, I thought, wait a minute, I do have an oops here. On that first book that I made back in December of 2016, on that one I put a blank page in both the front and back of the book. Then I ended up gluing the 2 ribbons on the sides of those blank pages. Then as a last step, I used some yellow thick paper as decorative paper for the inside covers, which hid the 2 ribbons. But on this book, I did not want to have an extra blank page in the front and the back. So I want to end up with only a half sheet of paper folded, decorative paper in the front, and then back inside covers. So what this means is I won't be able to glue the ribbons to the side of the signature stack. I will have to glue it to the inside covers. Not a big deal. So once the signatures are all sewed together, on the next step I want to glue some cheesecloth to the top of that signature stack. And I want it to be wide enough so I can also glue it to the inside covers. On the first book I used some thick cardstock instead of cheesecloth, and I think that made the book harder to open up and leaf through the pages. So I'm going to try cheesecloth this time. Then I let it dry, and then eventually I'll glue the signature stack onto the covers. And I'm not going to glue the edge of the signature stack, just the wings that stick out. And I'm hoping that gives my pages more flexibility. So I was trained as an engineer, so I like to use flowcharts. So bear with me as I quickly run through our steps we've done so far. We decided the book size would be a kind of a standard using 8.5 by 11 sheets folded in half, which gives pages 5.5 inches wide by 8.5 inches tall. Then I made the book stack by first writing the manuscript using Office Libre. I exported that out as a PDF file, imported that PDF file into Bookmaker 3, which created PDF signature files. I printed out the signature files, folded them, and then used an awl to punch holes, and then sewed the signatures together. And what we're going to do next is glue up the book stack. I cut some cheesecloth about 8 inches high and 3 inches wide. I'm going to glue that to the edge of the book stack and then clamp it in a vise and let it dry. So there's not much design or process variation in the steps up to this point. I actually bought this cheesecloth from Ace Hardware back in 2016 but never used it. So I decided it's time to use it. So I brought it out, opened the package. I scissor cut a strip about 4 inches wide and about 7.5 inches long to glue on the edge of the book stack. So first I clamped up the book stack in the vise using 2 pieces of 1x4. But the very top is not tightly clamped then. So I put Elmer's white glue on the top and then worked it in. And since it's not clamped real tight, it actually goes into the signatures a little ways. Then I put the cheesecloth on, added more glue, used my fingers and a brush to work the glue into the cheesecloth just on the top. Then I took the 3 plastic clamps and clamped the signatures tightly together. So going back to that flowchart we looked at just a minute ago, after we've got the book stack and the cheesecloth glued up, the next step is going to be to make the cover materials. And I need to cut 3 pieces of cardboard stock, and then I'm going to have to decide for the cover itself, do I want to use cloth or paper? Going to use the same chipboard that I bought for the first project back in 2016 that I bought from Amazon. I measured and it's 0.056 inches thick, which is roughly about 1/16 of an inch thick. Back in 2016 I laid out what the cover and the cardboard pieces are going to look like dimensionally, so I'm using the same diagram to make this book too. Back in 2016 I used some cloth that came from Lineco, if I'm pronouncing it right. And that material, cloth material, actually comes in 17 by 19 inches size, enough to make one book similar to my size. So using a good pair of sharp scissors, I cut out the 3 pieces of cardboard that I need to make the front and the back and the spline for the covers. Now I need to mark the cover material, which I'm going to use paper this time. And as I remember, you got to use a square and then mark everything out, which takes a lot of time. And I plan on making some more books of this size. So option 2 would be, why don't I just make a Luan plywood pattern so I can quickly mark out the covers on this book and other books in the future. It'll save me a lot of time. Luan is just thin plywood. It's only 3/16 of an inch thick. So I went ahead and cut out my pattern or my template, and here it is, ready to use. So my new template pattern worked great, and I put it on the cardboard paper on the back side of it, not the side that shows. And I don't know if you can see it, but my pencil marks there, I traced out where to cut out the material and where the cardboard needs to be glued down. The cover is going to be Hobby Lobby paper, 22 by 28 poster board. It was labeled for a whopping 99 cents each, and I measured it, and it's 0.012 or 12 thousandths of an inch thick. Now, using Hobby Lobby paper, they really don't tell you how thick the paper is or a weight per square inch or anything. And I like to document the thicknesses that I use so I can repeat it on future projects. And I just so happen to have an electronic micrometer that I bought back in April. It's very easy to use, so I used it to measure the thicknesses of the various types of paper I used in this project. So here we are, gluing the cover paper to the cardboard material. I used a cheap foam brush, so I made sure I spread the glue evenly, and I used white Elmer's glue. So here's the cover, all glued down to the 3 cardboard pieces, including folding over on the inside. A common trick that I use in my woodworking projects is set the oven at the lowest setting, about 120 F, and then stick in the items, and they dry much more quickly. In this case, I did not notice any significant warping of the cover as it dried, which is a good thing. After the signature stack had dried, you're going to notice that on the right-hand side of the book, those pages are not evenly aligned. They really need to be trimmed so they look nice and they're the exact same width. And it's just plain impossible to get all the signatures perfectly aligned as you glue them up. Now, when I made my first book 8 years ago, I played around with several techniques trying to figure out how to cut all the edges straight. I finally ended up using a ruler with a brass guide on it, or metal guide, and then a sharp X-Acto knife, and then take a lot of steps and passes, and each pass with a knife, try to cut a few pages off, and then keep working your way down. I actually lost my last X-Acto knife, so I ran up to Ace Hardware and bought a new one. They're pretty inexpensive. And in a low volume or even high volume book bindery, they have a machine that will actually slice, in this case, a 9/16 inch thick book in one quick pass. But I can't afford that type of machine, so I need some cheap way to trim those edges better. The good news is it only took about 5 minutes to trim the right-hand side of the book stack. And my ruler, as I said, has a brass edge guide to better guide that razor knife. It took a lot of passes, as you can see the pieces on the right. In retrospect, I probably should have clamped it back up when I was done cutting and try to sand the edges with 220 grit orbital sander. So back to that flow chart, we basically finished up making the cover where we cut the 3 pieces of cardboard stock, and then we glued the paper on. So after trimming the right hand side with a razor blade, the next step's going to be to glue that book stack to the cover itself. And I'm not going to use any glue on the 9/16 inch wide edge of the book stack. I'm just going to use it on the cheesecloth that overhangs the edge. I'm doing that because I want the pages to be more flexible. So I glued the back of the book stack to the covers. I used a small artist's brush with a green handle, as you can see here, and I also used a foam brush. The little artist brush let me get the glue right up next to the book stack itself. After I got the back glued up, I modified my clamping or temporary support scheme as shown here to hold the book stack vertical while I glued the front part of it as well. So with this setup, I could actually glue both the front and the back. Once the glue between the spline or the book stack and the covers had dried, I folded the book over, and here's a photo of what it looked like. Now the creases on the binding of the book are not perfect, and maybe I should have used a straight edge and bent those before I glued in the book stack. Something maybe to play around on the next book. But all in all, it looks pretty good. It is a hand-bound book. Also, the cheesecloth spline that I used to cover the edge of the book stack, that seems pretty strong after it dried. And you can see from this picture, I used 1.5 inch overlap of the fancy purple cover material onto the chipboard. Probably could have been a little bit less, maybe as small as 3/4 inch instead of 1.5 inches, but hey, it works. Here's what the back of the book looked like before I put the decorative insert paper in there, and the cheesecloth material has dried to the cover. So the next step in the flowchart is going to be to glue in the front and back inside decorative sheets that I'm going to use. And I'm only going to glue those to the cover, the insides of the covers. I'm not going to glue them to the first and last page like I did on book 1. I want to avoid any bleeding problems that I had, color bleeding on book 1. So I'm going to test and adjust the fit of these sheets as I go. So I had to decide what paper to use for the decorative sheets inside both the front and back covers. On book 1, what I used was yellow. It was way too stiff at 25 thousandths, 0.025. I have an old statistics book that I used to sew the covers on, or sew the signatures on. It's 6 thousandths of an inch. So I found some manila from Hobby Lobby that's 7 thousandths. I'm going to use that on this book too. So installing the decorative sheet, I decided to do the back one first, kind of figure out my process, and then do the front last. So I made it about 9 inches high and wider than the book, and I folded it in half. I inserted that folded sheet into the back of the book and closed the book. Then with a pencil I marked the outside of the book cover, and then I decided to take off about 3/8 of an inch. And then I marked the edge of the paper stack, and made that flush. And it was very hard to get it right.
Okay, so let's go back and look at book 1 that I made back in 2016 with a cloth binding. And if we open that up, look at the inside, you can see that my margin around the yellow decorative insert here is not the same. The big margin up here, there's a very small margin on this side, and a big margin down here. And I have a similar problem on the back of the book. You can see that it's just crooked the way it looks right there. So what I'm shooting for on this second book is more like the statistics book. I actually use this to sew the signatures on. It's kind of a leftover book, but on it has a white decorative cover on the inside, and it's only glued to the inside of the front cover. It is not glued to the first page, and you got a pretty nice joint down here. So that's what I'm trying to do on book 2, where I just glue it on the inside and I don't glue this side. So let's see how we did so far on book 2. Here's book 2, and this is the inside, which I haven't done yet. I haven't put the decorative on the front, but I have put it on the back. Here it is back here. And you can see that I've got a pretty good even edge in the back area. It's kind of hard to see here, but it's pretty good. It's even all the way around here on this side. So that came out pretty nice. And then you can't really see anything bad on the inside joint in there. And what I did on this, I cut the manila sheet oversize, folded it, put it in here, marked the outside edges of the book, trimmed them back about 3/8, left this side oversized, and then folded it together, took a pencil, and I marked where the edge of the pages was of this book stack, and then trimmed that. So that actually worked pretty good. So I'm going to try the same approach on the inside front cover.
So here's a photo of my finished book number 2 next to a coffee cup for scale, and I'm pretty happy with how it looks. I made a short video of actually handling the book so we can see how it handles.
So my second book is completed, and sometimes photos don't really give you much good idea as a video does. So let's just handle this book and take a look at book 2, which I just finished. Here's the book. I like this very decorative cover. I think my granddaughters will like this too, versus a plain red colored cloth cover. And I already showed a picture to one of them, and they were really excited. They liked this fancier color that I got from Hobby Lobby. But, you know, here's the book. Let's open it up. Okay, we've got the manila in here on the inside. Got a pretty good joint here going to the first page. And here's the cover here. And I'll put my granddaughter's name, whichever one helps me, in the date inside. And then we start going to the pages, as you can see here. Still not perfectly happy with the edges over here. I probably should have sanded them some more with 220 grit on an orbital sander. But that's something to work on. Maybe I'll make one more practice book before I do one with one of my granddaughters. Let's go to the back of the book. We have the manila in the back. It's glued to the back cover, inside cover, but it's not glued to that last page. Very similar to that statistics book I showed you earlier. And I like it. It has a good look. That's the last page with the end. The book itself is it's a little stiff, but you know, it's probably typical for a brand new book on that side. So all in all, I'm pretty happy. As usual, I learned more on book number 2, and I'm sure if I make some more, I'll continue to learn as we go along.
So after finishing book 2, I did go back and update my flowchart, and I added the last steps that I did. And I also noted on the finished book, I don't plan to have any dust jacket. Reason for that is it's hard to find the right size paper and be able to print anything on it with my printer. So I'm just going to leave it alone with a nice colorful cover. As I said, I'm a retired engineer, and I like to have drawings for concepts on how I do these projects. So if we go back to my first book, book number 1, done back in 2016, here's kind of a cross section of the book with a signature block in the center. And on that one, I had 2 ribbons there that I actually folded over, and I glued those to the extra white page that I had on the signatures on the front and the back. Then on top in the green, I glued the wings on there, and then I glued the wings to the cardboard inside of the book. One problem, then the last step was taking the yellow, folding it for my decorative sheets, and gluing those inside the front and back covers, as shown here. Unfortunately, the yellow material bled through to that white first page, and I actually had to glue on another white page to fix it. So I decided on book 2 I would use a slightly different approach. Now on book 2 that I just finished, Here's an updated concept drawing for how I did that one. You can see the gray signature block in the center, and there is no extra white page in the front or the back. And in this case, I used cheesecloth in green here to make the so-called wings, and I glued those onto the cardboard chipboard of the cover. And then last, shown in yellow again, but I used yellow manila at this time, I glued it to the inside of the book cover as shown, but I did not glue it to the signature stack. And that gave me a pretty good result. I always try to keep track of my lessons learned on these projects. So on this serial number 2 or book 2, overall I was much happier with how it turned out than the very first one I did back in 2016. And the learning curve says the more times you do it, the better you get at it. So that learning curve rule is still alive and well. One area I'm still not happy with is how to trim the right-hand edge of the book stack. Something I can work on the next book. I did get rid of the issue I had on the first book where the yellow decorative paper bleeded yellow onto pages of the book. I got rid of that by changing the book design. And I do like the Hobby Lobby decorative paper that I use for the cover. I plan on using that for some books with the grandkids instead of the plain colored Linico cloth that I used on the first book. So some closing thoughts on this project. I find manual bookbinding to be a fun hobby, and it's relatively inexpensive compared to other hobbies. And I've also learned there's many possible processes to use to bind up a book. I recommend you build several books of the same size, and then find the design and process technique that you like to use. I plan on involving the grandkids with making a couple of books, and I think they could help with folding the signatures and sewing up the signatures. They could also help to cut and glue on the covers. The other processes take too much waiting time, and they probably don't have enough patience for that. So we'll try one out with the grandkids and see how it goes. So in summary, this video explains at least 2 different ways to hand bind a book. Hopefully this video helps you on your projects and gives you some ideas. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please subscribe. Thank you.